Hello, folks, and welcome to the Season 2 finale of Author Adjacent, a podcast about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadney. Before we get into the episode, a word from our partner. Moonlit Getaway is a multi-genre literary journal that publishes new content every 2 weeks on Mondays. They are now open to general submissions in the categories of visual art, flash fiction, and poetry. Hurry over to moonlitgetaway.com for details. I'll have a link in the description for anyone who's interested. But now, back to the show. If you've been a long-time listener of the show, you may recall I've gone over my methods and experiences with creating the first and second draft of my debut novel. I just finished the third draft this week, so it seems like the perfect time for today's topic to be revising Draft 3 and beyond. Before we dive deeper into this episode, I just want to say congratulations on getting this far. If you've reached this point, it is an accomplishment many writers don't achieve, and it's a testament to the dedication and discipline you've put into your work. I know I said something similar after you finished Draft 2, but it's important to celebrate when you can in order to keep your spirits up. And I have good news. If your experience is anything like mine, the whole book writing process is about to get easier. It's all downhill from here. I know that phrase is usually meant negatively, but it never made sense to me. Walking down a hill is way easier than climbing up one. After writing the second draft, your novel should have a pretty solid base, as a primary goal of Draft 2 was to fix the flaming hot garbage we made in Draft 1. In this episode, we'll discuss the cyclical nature of the third draft process, and I'll share my experience with creating a beta reader group and how I plan to incorporate their feedback. From this point forward, the third draft, and all drafts that follow, will have less of a clear division between where one draft ends and the next one begins. This is because we've entered the revision stage of the novel writing, where the process becomes less about creating new content and more about refining and improving what's already there. At this stage, we have a solid grasp of the story's core, its themes, and its overall direction. The remaining work is focused on enhancing what we've built, polishing each aspect to bring it closer to its full potential. In my experience, the most effective method for this phase mirrors a simplified version of the approach I used in the second draft. 1. Read through the story carefully. 2. Identify any issues or areas for improvement. 3. Brainstorm solutions to address these issues. 4. Implement those solutions. Then repeat this process as needed. Each pass through the manuscript brings you closer to the polished final version of your story. While these steps are simple, there are some important things to remember while repeating through this cycle. First, there is a reason that this is a cyclical process. A novel is a massive undertaking with many moving parts that you have to keep track of in order to create a satisfying story. Are you bringing the setting to life, or did 3 scenes accidentally take place in generic forest number 4? Do all the characters have logical, interesting arcs? Or did your hero mysteriously master sword fighting overnight? Is the villain a strong foil for the protagonist? Or are they just twirling their mustache and plotting world domination? This is just a drop in the bucket compared to the hundreds of things you'll need to keep track of when writing a novel. To make the process manageable, focus on improving one specific aspect of the story for each revision cycle. This also means you don't have to read through the entire manuscript every time. For example, if you decide the romantic subplot needs some tightening up, you can focus only on those chapters where those 2, or 3, no judgment here, characters interact. That doesn't mean you should ignore other issues if you notice them along the way. As you read through for the romantic subplot, if you spot something else that needs work, make a note of it, just like we did for Draft 2. You can come back and address these notes in future revision cycles. This approach keeps you focused while gradually improving all aspects of the story. Now that I've outlined the steps for each revision cycle, the next question is pretty obvious. How many cycles of revision do I need to complete? Fortunately for you, the answer is easy. As many as it takes. I may have forgotten to mention that the answer is also annoyingly vague, so give me a chance to elaborate. The amount of revision your story will need depends on several factors that I can't calculate from the confines of this podcast medium. Some books are simply more complex than others. Some stories flow out naturally because we have first-hand knowledge of the subject, while others require more work to clarify ideas and fine-tune details. Most stories fall somewhere in between these extremes, so I can't tell you exactly how many rounds you'll need. What I can do is give you some indicators of when you're getting close. The first sign that you're ready to move on to the next stage is that you can no longer identify any major issues to fix. If your list of problems for revision cycles is empty, it's a strong indicator that you're close. Another clear signal is when your changes no longer improve the story, but instead just make it different. When you're mainly just flopping words around without enhancing anything meaningful. If you're experiencing either of these, it's time to bring in beta readers. In case you're unfamiliar, beta readers are typically other writers or enthusiastic readers who critique your novel with the goal of helping you improve it. They're called beta readers because they're usually the second group to read your story after you, the writer. Feedback from beta readers is invaluable because they bring a fresh perspective. While you're deeply immersed in your own story, beta readers can offer insights from an unbiased viewpoint. For instance, I've worked with my own writing group, and everything I share with them comes back stronger after they've read it. Shout out to Writers Anonymous. You guys are fantastic. Beta readers are skilled at providing constructive criticism and can identify frustrating characters, plot holes, dull scenes, or confusing parts of the story that might slip by you. Each beta reader will focus on a different thing depending on what they value in a story. I have one beta reader who puts high value on grammar rules, so I know much of his feedback will be about my overuse of em dashes and commas. Sorry, Jacob, and thank you again for reading my book. This feedback is incredibly valuable, so don't feel discouraged by the critiques. Beta readers will also highlight what's working well, pointing out scenes that are particularly strong, where you might push for a great moment even further to elevate your story. If you're sold on the idea of beta readers, you're probably wondering, how many do I need and where do I find them? When it comes to beta readers, think quality over quantity. Too many cooks in the kitchen applies here. You don't need tons of opinions, just a few thoughtful ones. If you start receiving a lot of conflicting feedback, it's a sign you might have too many beta readers. Generally, a good range is around 2 to 8 readers. I'm currently working with 7. As for finding beta readers, I was lucky to know mine personally. 2 are authors I respect, while the others are avid readers with whom I've had insightful conversations about books, so I know they think critically about what works in a story or not. If you don't know potential beta readers personally, try looking on Reddit or Goodreads. Both platforms host large communities dedicated to beta reading, often for free or in exchange for reciprocal feedback on their own work. So it's possible to create your group at no cost. I had to bribe 2 of my beta readers with Magic the Gathering cards. With all of this focus on revisions and feedback, it's worth discussing when to incorporate beta readers' feedback and when to set it aside. Working with my weekly critique group, I found that over 90% of the feedback I receive genuinely improves my writing. This is often because I haven't fully captured on the page what I envisioned in my head, and their insights help me bridge that gap. The last 10% of feedback can be more challenging. Much of it involves valid critiques, but I have to find a way to address the concerns of the beta reader without losing parts of the story that are essential to me. Though recall there are times when you need to kill your darlings. And then there's the small portion of feedback I disagree with entirely. In these cases, it's important to reflect carefully. Sometimes the beta reader might not fully grasp the story you're aiming to tell, which is okay. If after thoughtful consideration you still decide to reject their feedback, that's valid. In fact, having your story challenged and holding your ground can strengthen your confidence in your work. At the end of the day, feedback is a tool to help clarify your vision, but trust your instincts. They're essential for staying true to your story. All right, folks, that is going to wrap it up for the Season 2 finale of Author Adjacent. Thank you for hanging out with me today as I went over my method for revising the third draft, and my experience with beta readers. As with the last season finale, this marks a small break for Author Adjacent as I assess the show with a critical eye and see what improvements I can make. But worry not, for I will be back in December with fresh ideas. Now remember, the journey from writer to author might be long, but until then, let's be author adjacent together.